Hello, my friends, and welcome to Perfect Practice. Today, we have a truly exceptional conversation that you get to witness between me and a dear friend, Dr. Maya Shetreat. Maya has been a wonderful influence in my life. Maya, I don't know if you remember this, but one of our first conversations was actually a mind share during dinner, and we had a chance to sit down and really get to know each other. And I still remember that conversation because you gave me some great marriage advice. So thank you for being such a great listener and somebody who's been such a great influence in my life and the life of many practitioners out there in the world. It's been wonderful to watch your journey. I admire you for the courage that you have and also all the great work that you do. And just to give people kind of a perspective on who you are, and certainly we'll include all of your amazing accolades and accomplishments in the bio and the show notes. But I just want to highlight some of the things that you do because I feel like you're a Renaissance woman in the sense that you are consistently reinventing yourself and also doing really cool things and connecting the dots from what may seem to be very unrelated industries and help people understand how everything is connected. So you're trained as a neurologist and you're also an herbalist, you're an urban farmer, a ceremonialist, and of course, a multi time author. You wrote The Dirt Cure many years ago, excellent book. And I've got a new book that's been released called The Master Plant Experience, which is all about the science, safety, and sacred ceremony of psychedelics. And this is a topic that I'm really interested in. I know a lot of healthcare practitioners are interested in, and there's really this groundswell of interest in this topic from consumers as well, and people who are looking to heal fully and completely. Another thing that you've been working on, which has been really cool, and I've heard some great reviews about, is something called quantum drops. So we'll definitely get into that in our conversation today. And some of you who are watching this may recognize her beautiful face from the New York Times, the Telegraph, NPR, the Dr. Oz Show, and many more. So you've definitely made a mark in the world and you continue to impact people in a positive way. So I am so honored and excited for our conversation today. I know we're going to go wherever the wind takes us, and we're going to dive deeper into some of the topics that we've already talked about before we started recording. So welcome to our show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say that I respect and love the work that you do and who you are as well. So it's always such a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. So as we get into this, I'd love to, perhaps outline from your experience, what inspired you to kind of go from being a neurologist and then turning into an herbalist, an urban farmer? Like, what inspires you to keep kind of reinventing yourself or adding to your repertoire?
Well, it's such a good question. And usually the question people ask is, how did you go from being a conventional doctor to becoming, this? And, I always say I really was never a conventional doctor. And I sort of backed into medicine thinking I wanted to do psychoneuroimmunology. Um, so, and I was an English major. So somehow, I did some interesting dance and was captured with this idea of I want to connect consciousness and the mind and the brain and the body. And then I discovered after many, many, many years of training and, mind control, that that wasn't really much of a field.
Mm,
Um, and it wasn't really available to me. So I ended up going and doing an integrative medicine fellowship with the University of Arizona, and then was asked to be on their faculty. So I started kind of learning herbalism at that time. And herbalism was really because I really deeply believe that it's important that we are able to engage with every treatment that we offer to other people. And I was not really willing to do that with Risperdal and Depakote and Ritalin and, all of these other medications. But I was willing to engage with plants and diet and supplements and things that became very relevant. But to answer your question about how I keep being in this transformational space, it's not really always intentional. Like I'm not like, how can I reinvent myself now?
Mm.
I'm usually very happy and interested with, um, what I'm doing and just like to deepen that. And then usually something happens. And so it's a very organic process where I'm led into something else. It could be sometimes because of an illness. Like the reason I ended up writing The Dirt Cure had to do with my son, my youngest son, being sick, and how he healed. And kind of also true for the master plant experience. Similar, how did I end up going to Ecuador, studying master plants, writing that book? Similar, right? Like there was something that came up in my life. So all of this to say I'm a listener to what is being sort of whispered,
Mm.
to me, I could say maybe, not literally, usually figuratively. And something else I'll just say is I've started to become committed to learning things the easy way and not the hard way. And what I say about that is the easy way is not always easy, but it's easier than the hard way. So sometimes it's just knowing like it's time to move into new topics, new interests, new gifts, and it certainly does keep life interesting. That's for sure.
So that question, I know it can be a loaded question, but it was almost for myself because I find that every few years I'm, learning something new, and oftentimes it's from my own experience, and then wondering why more people don't know this and why more people haven't connected the dots. And then I go down these rabbit holes, so to speak, and then I come back up with all this knowledge and information that can really be revolutionary for people in their health approach and other practitioners as well. So I think there's some parallels between yourself and myself in that regard, is that we're always looking for ways to help people by connecting dots, bring in different modalities, and merge them and forge them together to create something that can really help people in a way that they've never been able to be helped before.
Definitely.
So I know, like, with the master plant, I want to create like an operating definition, because there's plant medicines, there's which maybe some people may have an awareness of that, so maybe we can create some definition. So what are plant medicines? What is the master plant or master plants? And what are psychedelics? And maybe there's some overlap between all of them, but maybe you can help us differentiate so we know where we're going with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So plant medicine is for me a huge umbrella topic. Some people will call psychedelics plant medicine, right? So there's that possibility if you're hearing that term. But for me, plant medicines are, from dandelion to osha to ayahuasca, right? A whole range of different kinds of plants. And so for me, that includes all the different plants we engage with.
Mm.
Um, Master plants are a term, it's an indigenous term actually. And of course, I don't speak for indigenous people who are very varied, um, many, many different views and ideas, but these are one of the kind of core ideas um, that might be common, right? Is plants are not things, they're beings. And
Mm.
they're not just beings. In this case, they're masters, they're master teachers. And master plants are considered to be teachers, respected, revered teachers that transmit ancient wisdom necessary for shifting human consciousness and helping humans to navigate the experience of being human. And so my indigenous teachers and my mentors don't use the word psychedelics. They feel like, ugh, like what? Right. And part of that is they don't think about molecules. They don't think about receptors. They think about beings and respecting those beings. and having a relationship, a respectful, reverent relationship with those beings. And so, what's important to know about master plants is not all master plants are psychedelics. For example, coffee, the coffee plant is a master plant. Tobacco is a master
Mm.
plant. Cacao, right? We all love our chocolate, right? Master plant. And people will go quite a bit out of their way for these masters. But all psychedelic plants are masters. So anything psychedelic, and that would be flora, fauna, fungi. So, the psilocybe mushrooms would be under this category, for example. And then what are psychedelics? So psychedelics are really like a Western term based in Greek, actually, based on Greek roots, but they're used to describe this mind altering uh, substance, right? Which could be plant, which could be compound. Um,
Mhm.
and those describe this altering of the mind, right? Altering of the mind. And so that's the definition, right? These definitions for me. And maybe you would get at least slightly different answers from other people. And some people also use the word entheogen.
Mhm.
That's tossed around as well. And a lot of people prefer that because psychedelics are really talking about the mind opening. Um, Entheogens are more like sort of the soul opening, right? It's a little bit more of a different, um, more spiritual or energetic way of thinking about um, what these plants, or in some cases, compounds, can do for us.
Thank you. So you mentioned tobacco being a master plant, coffee being a master plant, and these are commonly used in everyday society. I think coffee is the most consumed beverage on the planet, and of course, millions of people consume tobacco. Tell me, like how and maybe it's the same thing, and I just need familiarity with it. But I would imagine that getting a Starbucks coffee versus smoking a cigarette it's different. Like, is it the compound, is it the setting, is it the intention of how we use this plant? Like, what makes it a master plant? Like, what is the criteria that the plant has to fulfill to be categorized in such a way?
So that altering of human consciousness and behavior, right? Like, what will we do to get our coffee? I mean, I don't know. I don't think you're a coffee drinker. I don't know why I'm making that assumption. Um, are you?
I do enjoy coffee, yes, but I'm very particular about it.
Sure.
So my coffee has reishi in it, as an example,
Huh?
uh, which I don't know if that categorizes as a master plant or not, but I know it's a very powerful adaptogen.
Yeah, I mean, I like coffee. I went through a period in college. I don't think I was drinking coffee in a very respectful way at that time, per se. Then I didn't drink coffee for most of my adult life. And then around the pandemic, I got into this ritual with coffee
Mm.
that is very reverent. And it's a whole kind of experience for me. Um, and so coffee is something that will drive people's behavior. Like, I plan my day around that ritual, my morning around that ritual. It's very important to me. And a lot of people maybe don't plan it in a reverent way, but they plan it in a I need this way, right?
Mm.
And it changes us. It makes us more alert. It makes us more attuned. It makes us more focused, right? There are these different um, outcomes that help us feel more present in the world, or more uh, different. I mean, I think that's the best way to say it, is it shifts us in a significant way. Um, I want to say something about tobacco, and I talk about this in my book because I think it will kind of it'll ground us a little bit in the idea of the master. So, part of what I wrote about in my book, when I went through many different master plants, obviously couldn't do all of them, but a lot of them, I looked at the lore. So I looked at the history, I looked at the science, and I looked at the lore because I believe that oral tradition and extra literate knowledge is very, very important.
Mm.
And And so one of the pieces of lore I found about tobacco, which by the way, most people probably don't know, is considered the most sacred plant in every culture, even where it's not indigenous to that culture, it's been brought to these cultures. Tobacco is the top most sacred plant in any shamanic tradition around the world. So that's just kind of for context. And one of those pieces of lore is tobacco, the spirit of tobacco created humans to honor tobacco.
Mm.
So having that context, right, of this story of tobacco, I think it shifts us a little bit into maybe the kind of mindset and energy that people can feel about master plants. It's not to say that other plants don't influence us, don't help us, don't heal us, we can't have relationship with them. All of that is true. It's something uh, kind of richer and deeper and more transformative. Um, right? They are true teachers. And just as you would have maybe a guru or a mentor, right? You come to them in that reverent, respectful, humble way to learn and treat them with respect. And, you know, we could look at tobacco and say, probably, as you said, right? Like sitting and smoking a cigarette, most people are not necessarily coming to tobacco in a way that honors tobacco, right? But
Mhm.
I usually, when I work with people, tell people to grow a tobacco plant as their number one, I mean, if they're smokers, right? And they're like going through something or they want to quit, I say, okay, first thing, grow tobacco and start caring for that plant. I grow a tobacco plant, for example. I've never smoked, but I do grow a tobacco plant because they're very sacred and I learn a lot from them.
Hmm. So where does I'll bring up two other compounds. One being cannabis. Does that fit into the category of a master plant? Yeah, okay, I figured that. And then another one that might be a wild card is alcohol, because that changes and alters people's consciousness and behaviors, and people do wild and crazy things when they to consume alcohol and even when they consume it. So where does something like that fit into the equation?
So most people don't know that a lot of most alcohol obviously comes from plants.
Hmm.
And so the plant themselves, like let's say if we're talking about gin comes from juniper, right? Just as an example. So like we could kind of work backwards in that way. And so it's a yes with a little bit of um, it's a yes with a little bit of an asterisk next to it, I would kind of say.
Okay.
Um, because, yeah, but another example I'll give you that I think is probably worth mentioning is the coca plant. And
Hmm.
so the coca plant, is where now, what most people will think about is cocaine, right? That they've derived cocaine, which is through a whole process of taking out one compound and so on. It's not like what the coca plant is. But the coca plant has been used for energy and for longevity and for altitude sickness. And when I went to Ecuador for the first time, a friend of mine who's like a flight nurse and he's like, does a lot of intensive care nursing said, the one piece of advice I can give you is if someone offers you coca tea or to chew on a coca leaf, don't say no, especially if you have altitude sickness. Don't worry about it. And I thought, okay, whatever. And then there I was with altitude sickness. Oh my God, so bad. We were all like so loopy and nauseous, and we were supposed to go in these hot springs, and someone gave me coca leaf to chew on. 3 minutes, and I was fine. And I was able to enjoy the day, and everybody kind of settled into it. And again, it's like this is what I think is really important is when we come to these plants with the kind of reverence and respect, right? Rather than, let's say, commoditizing them, we can, or overusing slash abusing, right? Then we can have very, very profound growth and transmissions that are incredibly helpful, health transformations, and so on. If we don't, these are powerful, powerful beings, quote unquote. They're powerful, and they can destroy us. And we could look at tobacco, we could look at cocaine, we could look at any number of different plants and say it is a danger. I mean, even like coffee, alcohol, right? Cannabis, right? Look what's happening with cannabis. I mean, we're seeing kind of the darker side in a way, I think, of cannabis as it's become very, very available, at least certainly in the United States.
Yeah, well, in Canada they've legalized it, so it's been interesting. And to go back to your story about the coca leaf, I was in Costa Rica, and we were on this like monster hike, and there was three other gentlemen with me, and one of them pulled out coca leaves, and the three of them had taken it before, and they're like, they took it, put it in their mouth, started chewing on it and sucking on it. And then I turned it down because of probably my lack of awareness, and I hadn't had this conversation with you and just the stigma around it, because I've never done cocaine and I don't plan on it. And so the association there was so strong for me that I'm like, you know what? I have an addictive personality. The last thing I need is this on my plate. So I turned it down. And these guys were just like running up the freaking hill, like kicking my ass. And I felt like 20 years older than them because I couldn't keep up with them. And it was just like they just turned on this like magic switch that allowed them to just, hyper oxygenate their tissue or something.
Yeah.
And it just, and, not that it's a competition of who's healthier or who's more fit, uh, but I was like one of the fitter people in that group. So I'm like, how are they doing this? Like, what's this magic plant that they just consume? So now, in hearing this explanation from you, it makes total sense. I shouldn't have turned it down. I should have, taken it with reverence, and I would have enjoyed the rest of that day. Not that I didn't, but it was just so fascinating to see how it instantly turned on the jets for them, and they were able to navigate this terrain without any challenges. So pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me, how are you using this are you using this in clinical practice? Are you teaching this to practitioners? Like, how are you disseminating this message out there to the world, aside from your book, of course? Like, um, how is this showing up for you and in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I will, just because you mentioned, not having tried cocaine, and I also have not. And I would say I'm not a person who prefers to be altered. I always tell people I live in a very psychedelic reality just at my baseline. And I feel like you can understand that and maybe even relate to it. Like I see the world in a very kind of magical way. Um, so I'm not a big partaker, I would say, of psychedelics. I have had some experiences, obviously, but for me, I go to a teacher, I get something very important from that teacher, and I'm going to then apply it and enact it and transmit it in the way that feels appropriate and respectful and helpful. And so the way that I've done that, and by the way, I would say I've been doing that for over a decade, slowly unfolding and realizing, even from just one journey that I had with the San Pedro cactus, which was very, very important for me, that important journey. Um, and I was very nervous. I didn't even go to Ecuador on this trip where I had my first psychedelic experiences of adulthood. I didn't even go on the trip thinking I was going to take psychedelics. Like a lot of people now go on this like kind of psychedelic tourism or whatever, all fine, but I was going to learn about plants. And I
Mm,
was going with a fourth generation shaman, PhD in ethnobotany. We were going to go to the jungle and the mountains, etc. Nobody said a word about, oh, there's going to be ceremony and we're going to be. So I was not at all prepared for that. And in fact, I don't think I would have gone, if I'm
mm,
honest, because I was like, a mom of young kids, a doctor. I was like, a respectable person, quote unquote, or, maybe not really, but I felt like that's what I was. And I don't think I would have done that. I wouldn't have taken that risk. And so somehow it was like foisted upon me in this very unexpected way. And I feel like What I always say is master plants pulled me in kicking and screaming. Like I was sort of resistant. I always have been. Even days before I started writing my book, I was like, I'm not writing a book about this. This isn't my thing. I'm not going to do this. Right. And then, 85,000 words later, I have this book that is about much more, I think, than psychedelics. Um, but yeah, so to say, how do I bring this into my work? So part of it is, I grew up in a household where there was a lot of trauma. And um, what I've learned, I think, over the years, and the whole beginning of my book really looks at how trauma embeds in our body and creates patterns and our whole entire perception, which I can talk about a little. Um, but what I started to realize is that's really driving so much of everything that's happening physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. We're all wounded. I mean, we're all wounded,
Mhm.
some to a greater degree than others, perhaps, but it doesn't really matter because whatever wounds you have feel like the worst wounds, right? It's like that's what you have. And I grew up in a lot of kind of traumatic situations. I lost my father in a very traumatic way when I was 11. Um, you know, and on and on. And so what I realized is a lot of what I was doing as a physician, even as an integrative physician, even as an integrative physician and herbalist, um, and doing all of the things I was doing, were really not taking into account the real, I would say, root cause. I mean, the root cause is really like we all get wounded as humans. So the root cause is just that we're human, but the root cause meaning what's embedded in our cells.
Mm.
What are our cells remembering? And kind of like, how do we touch into or tap into our cellular memory? Because our cells can either be in defense and protection mode, or they can be in growth and evolution, right? That's, you really can't be primarily in both. You can be primarily in one or the other. And what's happening on a cellular level, if you think about cells in our bodies as being intelligent, as being their own beings, and as a community, as a universe, as right, that you are in some way lucky enough that they've come together and decided to be Maya or Sachin, um, you're you have to be in communication with them, what you're saying to them, what you're thinking, all of that. Cells understand all different kinds of languages. They understand insults that are physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, relational, and then they translate it into physical um, issues very
Mm.
often. So, what I became interested in is how do we touch these things? How do we shift these things? How do we start to I think healing is a really interesting term. It sounds very like finite. I think healing is just part of who we are every day. I think about the concept of salugenesis, which is moving towards health and well-being. So it's not static. You don't get there, right? It's every
Mhm.
day, and it's different every day. It's different every year. It's different every decade. So this is where master plants became interesting to me because they really help us um, tap into both this world within and how we're really not just us, right? None of us are just Maya or Sachin. We're also connected. I mean, even just we're connected to our family of origin, no matter how much we wish we weren't, in some cases, or the opposite. I mean, right? We're connected outside of time and space. We might grow up with someone for a period of time and never see them again. They might live on the other side of the world. We're still connected to them, right? We still have these ties, and our ancestors, right? As well. That's outside of time and space. And we might never have met our ancestors, but they live in our DNA, right? The way our
Mm.
DNA is labeled, our epigenetics and our cells, and how we see and experience the world. So, all of this to say, I became very interested in how we tap into what's around us and the kind of invisible world, and how supported we actually are as well, both within and around us. And that's where master plants, both on a kind of macro dosing, I think this is the way most people think of them, right? Journeying and, you know, ceremonial, etc., or that kind of thing, right? How, um, where does that have a role? Microdosing, which is a smaller sub psychedelic dose. You can do life, you go shopping, you take care of your kids, you go to work, etc. But you're in this shift of that cellular memory. And quantum dosing, which is sort of this um, co creative project I was roped into by the master plants, I will say. Maybe a little less kicking and screaming, but yeah, so that's more like a vibrational dose that's based in indigenous ways of working with the plants so that that's safe, it's legal, children, pregnant, medically complicated, all of, you know, sensitive people, you know, of which I am one. And we've just heard really profound shifts and transformations with that. So, yeah, so that's, and I work with people directly. I do online ceremonies with people, quantum activations. I teach a course, a 10-month psychedelic informed practitioner course where we go through science, safety, sacred, have a whole really beautiful retreat in there as well. And so, yeah, it's just kind of, I let the plants sort of lead me in how they want to be um, shared.
I love that. Thank you. You talked about cellular memory, and as a practitioner and somebody who's just trying to stay on top of things, you know, you're hearing more and more about how adverse childhood experiences affect our experience as adults, whether it's chronic illness, chronic anxiety, you know, emotional challenges that people might face. So, tell us how you know, for somebody who's wondering, do I have, you know, maybe we call it a dysfunctional cellular memory, or it's just it is what it is, right? It's just remembering our past experiences. What are some ways that that can show up for somebody? So if somebody's listening to this and like, oh, I think I might have that, like what are ways that they might be able to identify that this is the path or the route that they need to go down to unlock their next layer of healing?
Well, so any physical illness is related to cellular memory.
Mm,
So, especially if it's chronic. Um, you know, there's a lot of data that looks at adverse childhood events. And just to be clear about what those are, they're not like, oh my God, you know, you were in a shootout as a child. It's your parents got divorced, or you had a family member with an addiction, or like alcoholism, you had physical or mental abuse or sexual abuse, or you witnessed that. Um, you know, a family member might have been incarcerated. So these are not unusual kinds of events, you know, and the more
mm,
of those you may have been exposed to, the more it actually impacts this cellular memory. And the way I describe it, just on a mitochondrial level for people who are listening, so you know it's not just like some kind of cute term, the configuration of your cells change when you have a cellular memory of danger. Okay. And that danger could also be like you were bullied, right? I mean, it could be all kinds of things that don't have to be what we call capital T trauma. It can be things that are more subtle. And so, what I talk about is spaghetti and meatballs. So, no one, I think, forgets this after I say it. Um, most, our healthiest mitochondria, okay, right? The energy makers of the cell, for those who maybe remember back if you're not a medical or a science person, um, they actually change. They could either be in their healthiest form branch spaghetti, okay? And if you look at pictures, they look like branch spaghetti. And then they're communicating, they're exchanging nutrients, they're releasing waste, you know, they're in community, okay? Or if they're in a perceived danger situation, they are not branch spaghetti. They look like meatballs, and they're balled up literally like meatballs, where they're not exchanging
mm,
information or nutrients. They don't release waste in the same way. They are not in community. They're in quarantine. Okay. So just imagine, right, the cells in your body, in your kidney or in your heart or in your brain, and that's your migraines, or that's your like high blood pressure, or that's your, it could be your like fatigue, it could be your autoimmunity, right? These are the things that embed, and it's literally, you can take pictures of the mitochondria of the cell and see the configuration. Neurons, when we are in trauma, actually we dissolve synapses. So like I kind of call it like, because when we're in trauma, we're isolated. We isolate ourselves. We have lonely neurons in those situations. So part of what how we know that we have cellular memory of some kind of like cell danger, right, is because we're suffering from physical or mental, um, or even kind of like emotional, right? It could be relational, it could be how we relate to people. Why are people always angry at me? Or why do people always take advantage of me, right? Because sometimes there's like nervous system dysregulation that also is imprinted with this cellular memory, so that we're people pleasing all the time. So we're always saying yes when we really mean no. And then we feel taken advantage of. And then we explode at people because we haven't set good boundaries. And then the people are like, why is this person such a jerk? And then they end the friendship, right? I mean, I'm giving this because it's pervasive.
Hmm. So it's safe to say almost all of us have some form of trauma that it's worthwhile exploring, investigating, releasing so that we can express the best version of ourselves. Because it sounds like most of these things were done to us as opposed to our own doing, or things that we witnessed. I mean, it's rare that a child would be the cause of a divorce, as an example, right? I mean, and sometimes, people have illness in the family and that causes the divorce. I get that, but it's probably a good idea for everyone to explore this, and perhaps even before a chronic illness pops up. I know that, you know, uh, knowing this and having this awareness as a clinician, and I think it makes sense for all of us to explore this for ourselves, so that we're not, 10 years down the road trying to figure out what went wrong. If we can address it sooner, I think that makes a lot more sense. And kind of in that same vein, I know like uh, a lot of people are taught, or we've been conditioned to think through the media and propaganda, that, psychedelics are drugs. And, drugs is kind of a very loose term these days. Having a 14-year-old having to differentiate between what plant medicines are, what drugs, quote unquote drugs are, what hard street drugs are. I mean, drugs is a very broad term. And, why are doctors now finally turning to, these master plants and plant medicines as legitimate treatments? Was there research that came out? Like, what was it that created that shift in our kind of relationship with these plants from a medical standpoint?
Yeah. Yes, is the answer. And, and I think you bring up a really important point around, you know, drugs. And I think that kind of harkens back to our earlier conversation about how we come with reverence and respect, or kind of commoditizing and, abuse, I'll say it, but maybe like even saying I use, right? I use cannabis, or I use ayahuasca, or I use, right? Like that whole concept, right? Shifting that
Hmm.
and saying I work with, or I learn from, or right, or however you want to phrase it. I would say we all have trauma, but I kind of call it wounding. I just think it's like less charged, that we all experience wounding in
Mm.
the course of being human. And when we're children, we have these periods of plasticity, critical periods of plasticity, where things that happen to us embed in a very particular way, because as children we have to learn how to walk and talk and the rules of our society and potty train and engage with authority, et cetera, interact with peers very, very, very quickly in a very short time. So our plasticity, our ability to make connections and learn is very, very profound during that period. And difficult things that happen also embed in a different way than like what might happen to us when we're 25 or 30 or 50, right? It'll just be different. So these psychedelics, these master plants, actually can reopen, for better or for worse, temporarily, these critical periods of plasticity, where then we can maybe reframe right? You can't erase your wounding, right? I can't bring my father back from whatever happened when I was 11, but what I can do is make meaning and maybe be in an equilibrium, right? Around those things, understand it differently, have a different kind of compassion, etc. And I'm not saying that to say some very charged like TMI thing, but just to say, we're all in it, right? We're experts, and we're also learning alongside of everybody else. When you're asking about doctors and why they're interested, well, back in the 50s and 60s, there was a tremendous amount of research, very, very positive research, looking at LSD.
Hmm.
Many people may not believe that, especially if you were alive at that time. But for LSD and also the psilocybe mushrooms, the magic mushrooms, and there was also sort of then this free for all, that kind of the whole kind of hippie era, etc., where things really got out of hand in the sense that there wasn't really a safe held container. And so people, were out on the streets kind of experiencing these journeys that were very, where their trauma was coming up, etc., with no container that was safe and allowing them to not be re-traumatized, and ended
Mm.
up in hospitals and this. And there were also political reasons, but all of that to say that's really why they kind of got classified as drugs. Um, Now, it doesn't mean that they aren't powerful. I always say, when I learned from my teachers, they would always say master plants are not good or bad, they're powerful. And
Mm.
how you engage with them determines how you will be transformed, right? So, this is why I train people, and why I work with people around it, because there's actually, to now, currently, almost every major academic institution in the world has a department, or at least a lot of work happening around psychedelics and how they heal everything from major depression to traumatic brain injuries, to addiction, to OCD, to PTSD, to on and on and on. And they're looking now at dementia, they're looking at Parkinson's, eating disorders, sexual trauma, like really, really difficult to treat kinds of conditions. And we're seeing 1 to 2 doses in many cases with, and I always add, right, professional support before, during, after. I'm not saying that must happen in order to get benefit, but it is how these studies are done. So if you are thinking, oh, they're so successful, that's part of the picture. So doctors are getting very interested. I mean, we know the limitations of what there is to offer our patients for these chronic, very difficult conditions better than many people, other than the patients themselves. And you and I, who have practiced integrative medicine and functional medicine and all that, know that even that has its limitations. And,
Mhm.
you and I have both seen people come in with their 50 supplements 3 times a day and their diets and their all these things. And not to say there isn't a place for that, not to say people can be very helped that way. And there are people who aren't helped, right? And what then? So this is why I think there is a lot of excitement around this, and hopefully a little more caution and balance than, back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, when you look at it as a business model, in traditional pharmaceutical interventions, you see the doctor once, take the medication forever. And, my experience and perhaps your experience, is that you take the medicine once or twice, and then you may see the doctor a few times, but then the patient is in a sense cured if they've resolved some of these causative factors, these wounds that we talk about that are contributing to their chronic condition. So it'll be really interesting to see how big pharma kind of navigates this, because my suspicion is that and maybe I love your thoughts on this, but that's not how the plants want to express themselves, is through that channel. So I'd love for you to speak to that. Like, how do you see this being disseminated to the masses? Is it through big pharma channels, through standardization, or is it through maintaining the art and ceremony and reverence of the plants themselves?
I mean, this is like a whole big conversation, and I do try to get into it in my book, but I think um, you're very right that they're, the plants have their own goals here, right? Like, why are they suddenly now, right? Ayahuasca and San Pedro and the mushrooms, et cetera, suddenly in this, and I say suddenly, but they've burst into the mainstream in a certain sense, in a way they just haven't for decades. Um, that's the plants, that's not like some person doing that. And, I think there's going to be some clinical way that they're going to be available. I think that there's going to be um, hopefully a maintaining of a more ceremonial approach, and I hope conversation with indigenous communities and ways of recompensing them for all of the custodial work that they've done. And then I would say too, I actually think the big way um, we're going to see these master plants become more beneficial and kind of widespread is going to be through microdosing, and I believe through quantum dosing as well, because I think I've seen in the work that I've done, with people and even in myself, it's not always necessary to have these big, what I call, cannonball and fireworks experiences. It's very possible to have, sub perceptual, and I put that in quotes because I don't really think it's sub perceptual. I just think it's not altering in a way that, maybe is as um, I don't want to say disabling, right? But it certainly kind of takes you offline. I
Mhm.
think that there's a lot of benefit in things like microdosing and quantum dosing, and that's really probably going to be the future for most people and how they might engage with master plants. I don't actually think large doses are for everyone all of the time.
Mm. Speaking of that, speaking of large doses all the time, I hear countless people just continuously tripping. It's like every month they're flying somewhere to do a ceremony, and then the next month they're going somewhere else, and um, that doesn't seem right to me. I'd love your thoughts on that because it seems like it's it just doesn't seem right and doesn't seem like the correct approach. And maybe they're not getting what they should be getting out of it, or maybe they're abusing it. But like, where where does it get to where people cross that line? I'm curious from your perspective.
Um, so there's this saying, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. And I'm saying that because, people who have these big ceremonial experiences, the, cannonball and firework experiences, it's like a peak experience, right? And it's very like heady, and, a lot of people like will run home and like get divorced, or like quit their job and move. Like they're not, because you're in some like kind of really altered phase, because that's part of what you're supposed to do, see the world differently. I don't believe in acting that quickly, ever. But the big key to benefiting is the unpacking, what we call integration, right? It's the unpacking of what happened, which is nice to do with somebody often. And then how are you actually enacting it in your day to day life? And that's actually kind of the hard part, right? But also the wonderful part, because, that's what we're here to do, is to be here together, bringing, our gifts that we come back from our hero's journey, whatever that might be. And that could be the loss of a family member, that could be the birth of a child, that could be, um, some new topic that you go down the rabbit hole and come back. It could be a psychedelic journey. It could be all of those things. And then we have to come back and integrate it into our lives. And It's the hard part, but it's the wonderful part. And I think a lot of people are kind of wanting to avoid the human experience by going um, dipping into the peak experience so frequently that they kind of don't feel like they have to really evolve and help other people.
Mm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, it does to me, and I almost feel like they might be trying to escape instead of do the work, right? Because it can be quite alluring. I can tell you that, because it can be quite amazing experiences that people have, and the integration oftentimes is the hardest part, and I would argue the most important part. People think it's the journey, but it's actually how we bring that the fruits of that journey back to our life, and not even run away from it. I mean, maybe getting the divorce isn't the right thing, but seeing who that person truly is, that's probably the work that needs to be done, instead of running away from the problem, or distracting yourself from the problem. I'd love for you to share, what are, maybe there's like one or two, or a few case studies, like what's something amazing that you've witnessed, that is an experience that you've had, or perhaps a client has had, using master plants as an intervention, whether it's through micro or macro or quantum dose.
Yeah. I mean, I can give you countless examples, but, I'll say, I've seen, and I'm thinking of one particular person um, who had a really serious multi-substance abuse issues, had really hit like a rock bottom, but was really still not able to stop.
Mm,
Um, and actually worked with a plant called iboga, and it's actually one of the probably stronger and um, more dangerous of the master plants that are psychedelic. This is a plant, from Africa, and people need like a medical assessment in advance. So this wasn't with me, just to be clear, but um, had an experience with iboga and never used again and never wanted to use again. Totally changed their life. One journey, one
mm,
journey, never used again. And so many stories like that. Another story, a woman who had very advanced sarcoma. So she had very advanced cancer, and she decided that she was going to um, go have ayahuasca journeys, and went for a series of journeys. And I think they had given her like 4 months to live. And she lived for decades more. So the cancer disappeared. And there's real physiology, I won't get into it at this point, but there's real physiology uh, around how these plants actually shift mitochondria and help cells that are dying to kind of have a new life, and so on and so forth. There's really beautiful data around DMT and the sigma 1 receptor, lots of very cool stuff. Um, but obviously this is happening on many levels, right? There's a lot. It's working with our bodies. They're working with our bodies on many levels. And then with things like microdosing, I mean, my gosh, I have like seen people's anxiety just dissolve. Social anxiety, which is a huge problem for young people, especially right now. Um, young adults, sort of like 18 to 25 to even 30, there's like so much social anxiety. We could talk about texting and screens and the pandemic and all of these things that really have interrupted their social development. So seeing just like really beautiful, like opening up of people in a social way, dealing with just anxiety, period, depression. I've had people with autoimmune disease who have um, seen a lot of their numbers, their inflammatory numbers coming down, feeling better, more energy. So, what I'll say is it's exciting to see what's possible. Um, it the way it's talked about now sort of has this cure-all sort of sound to it, and I don't necessarily like that. Like, I don't want people to think it's a magic bullet. I call my program that I train people um, in how to educate people and inform people in their practice about psychedelics, I call it Portal. And the reason I call it Portal is because I think of these plant medicines, these teachers, as portals. They open the window or the door, and then we get to decide, as you said, right? We get to decide if we're going to step through, right? And how are we going to then create our masterpiece? How are we going to live in an artful, more alive way? So I don't want people to hear me speaking and think, oh my gosh, this is going to cure my everything, right? But does it open up windows and doors for things that are very stuck? Yes, it absolutely can.
Wonderful, thank you. So, describe to me how someone would take the master plant products. So, the quantum drops, for example, is that taken away? A supplement would be taken a couple times a day. Is there a ceremony that surrounds the process? Describe to me what that's like.
Yeah, so the quantum drops are basically made in a vibrational way with the master plants. So they're made with the plants, but not from the plants. That's why they're legal. There's no issue around those things, but there is a very long history, indigenous practice around vibrational ways of experiencing master plants. And so anyone
Mm,
who's been in an ayahuasca ceremony, for example, will have heard Icaros. Icaros are these songs that are not actually made up by the maestro, the ayahuasquero, but actually are given to them in their training with the plant, from the plant. And they're considered to be transmissions of the medicine, but vibrational transmissions.
mm,
And they're as powerful as drinking the medicine themselves. That's what they say. And sometimes in ceremony, non-Western ceremony, they will drink a little bit of the ayahuasca themselves, but the people they're healing, they'll only hear the Icaros and have the healing and experience the healing. So that's what these, I'm looking at my quantum drops here. That's why, that's why I'm
mhm,
looking to the side. Um, so we have the grandmother, the grandfather, and the children. So the grandmother is made with the ayahuasca. I have an over 10-year-old ayahuasca vine that I grow. So I grow my master plants, and that's a way that I quantum dose. So quantum dosing doesn't just happen with quantum drops, but um, it's one way, right, to grow the plant. Then there's grandfather, the San Pedro, from the San Pedro cactus. I have many San Pedro cacti, and I don't consume my plants. I should just add that. I just tend them. That's my service.
mm.
And then the children, and that's from the psilocybe mushrooms. Um, and So how do you engage with them? Well, what I really say is they're the most effective if you take them daily. And I've had people who have taken them like 3 times a day. You don't have to. You can take them once a day. And the way that I usually recommend to do it is um, these are vibrational medicines. So put them somewhere beautiful in your home, right? It could be next to like flowers, it could be like a little altar space, a little beautiful spot, but just keep that spot as this beautiful space because it really holds a nice vibration, and that's the experience, right? And then you can take them in your purse or a bag. It's not like you can't travel with them. People do all the time, and they go through customs and all that stuff, no problem. But if you're in a regular situation, um, having your ritual, right? And just being with them, being with yourself and being with them in this beautiful spot each day, and taking one or um, you can actually take up to all three, which I did not think would be the case. And of course, this has been a whole learning for me because I was like, oh my God, are these even going to do anything? When I first started working with them, with my clients, with their consent, obviously, before I really put them out in the world. Um, and now I just get essays. I don't even just get like testimonials. I get like 3-page long emails about
Mm.
people's experiences. And I mean, I could tell a lot of stories because those are some good stories, honestly. But yeah, and just it can be as simple as like, really, the idea is, how do you have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and the heart to perceive what's all around you, what's all around all of us, but we're not able to access it, right? And so, what these can do is open these windows of perception, this sensory gating that we have, and help us modulate it so that we're able to perceive in this more sensitive way, but also close when necessary, right? So it's about being able to modulate and perceive. Um, and then these opportunities can open up for us around healing, around connection, around enlightenment, right? Whatever it may be that is sort of ready in that moment.
It's so such a fascinating conversation because you've almost, at least from my perspective, created a new category of I even hesitate to call it supplementation. Um, how do you categorize this? Like, because looking at the list of ingredients, you're I'm on your website right now as I'm looking at this. So you're kind of infusing, the vibrational qualities and quantities of these plants. You're putting crystal vibrational energies in there, and medicinal smoke and medicine song and music of the plants. So how would you categorize this? Because it seems like a whole new category of again, supplementation is not the right word, but what would be the word you would use?
Well, I would just call it a medicine. I mean, I will just first of all say, in a million years, even when we first met, Sachin, and had that conversation, which I at least remember parts of way back when, I would never have thought I'd be sitting here talking about, a vibrational master plant product that has music and crystals infused into it in a million years. So, yet here I am, because I'm listening. But I think this is, I'm about to actually put up a much more informational website on a lot of the scientific, which I think you're going to actually love. A lot of the sort of how we activate our DNA,
Mm.
essentially. And I think this is going to be like very groundbreaking in terms of the future of medicine. It's going to preclude, ultimately, not these in particular, not only this, but this way of engaging with our cells and our DNA in a vibrational way. And we're already feeling it because people are talking about quantum energy. People are talking about light very differently than they used to, and sound. And so
Hmm.
we're already kind of, it's time is here, in a way, or coming. Um, and I think we all are feeling that. I think this is really, it's going to preclude this idea of, um, you know, taking drugs all the time, right? Like pharmaceuticals or this or that. Um, and we're going to be thinking about like kind of the energetic content, which is the case right now. I mean, I tell someone, if I've ever had to prescribe pharmaceuticals, which I didn't do a whole lot of for most of my career, but if someone got to a place where pharmaceuticals were called for, I would say, um, talk to them and say, thank you so much for being here to help me with this healing. Because, like, the last thing you want to do is be in some oppositional relationship with the thing you're putting in your body, and you don't want it to be there. Say, okay, I invite you in to do this healing. And it sounds silly, but even if we think about food, right? We talk about eating healthy. Some food is more alive than others, right? And we can understand soil can be more alive, food can be more alive. Everything has this vibrational content, and our DNA is like an antenna that communicates with everything that we come into contact with. And when I say contact, it's what's around us, of course, as well. It's not just like what we ingest, you know? Um, and so we're always in this communication with everything around us, even when we don't realize it. And I think what quantum drops are offering is starting to activate that. So it's going to, I think, accelerate our awareness around what we want in our environment. And I hope that they can also help us actually co-create the reality, kind of a quantum reality where there's so many possibilities. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of this current timeline that's happening. I would love if we could shift it, a little bit to something. I mean, I love parts of it, but there are parts I'm not a fan. So, I think there's a lot of possibility of creating shifts. And what I want to help people to access is their capacity to co-create something that is more beautiful, right? And truthful and true, that we can engage with and access.
Thank you for sharing. Have you considered, maybe you've already done this, but I'm curious, done any like decentralized research, like gotten a group of people with aura rings to see how their HRV changes, or muse with, reading EK, the ECGs and seeing how their brain waves change. Have you had a chance to do any research like that on people before and afters?
We've started doing that. I actually am working with a mitochondrial researcher who's done some work with Joe Dispenza also. And he does a lot of work around miracle healing.
Hmm.
So, but he's a faculty, in like good university. And so we are starting to look at it on a cellular level. And but yeah, I'm always down. So if you ever want to like help me organize something like that, um, I would I would be delighted um, to measure the befores and afters and collect that data. I think it would be really exciting. I'm getting to hear and see in a one-on-one kind of way, and
Hmm.
sometimes in a group way, but I haven't done it with like EKGs on, for example, something like that. But it could be done, definitely.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see. Like we've done this with a few other companies that we've worked with to kind of validate. Not that I'm trying to validate the product, but to measure kind of the changes that take place for people. And a lot of our clients that we coach have aura rings, and we
Mm.
actually have all that information coming into our platform. So every day that data gets pulled into our system, and it'd be interesting to take like a cross section of those people, and and maybe it's 10, 20, whatever it is, but to have them on the drops and then to see like how the shifts take place. Because I remember when the first time my wife did psilocybin, she had like a 40-point jump in her HRV,
Yeah.
and it was like you could literally see the graph, and it just went boom up like that. So we knew something shifted for her in her nervous system, and it was just, we didn't have to have this huge research lab to know that, to discover that, because the ring kind of dictated that, or allowed us to gather that information. And we weren't even doing it intentionally. It just, we're like, what the heck, like look at this bump in your score. It was quite profound. So yeah, if you're ever down, let me know. We can have an offline conversation, and we can definitely round some people up. And because of the way the information comes into our database, you can parse out start dates, end dates, like,
Mm.
deltas that take place over time. And yeah, I'd be happy to help you with that, because I know that certainly plant medicines have made a profound difference in my life. And I like the fact that these drops don't come with the legal issues, the stigma, the the trips or the journeys, all that stuff that that goes along with macro dosing. And it seems like it's something that's much more accessible to people. And uh and I'd love to see if there's anything we can do to support you in getting this message out there to more people. So whether it's through this interview, or whether it's through helping you do some research with this, we're happy to help in any way that we can.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and we can definitely talk about it more offline.
Awesome. I know you've done a ton of interviews. So I'm curious, is there a question that somebody hasn't asked you that they wish they would have? Maybe it's a question for the quantum drops. Maybe there's a question that the drops haven't been asked that they'd like to express the answer to.
Well, I'm going to have to sit for one moment and kind of think.
Take your time.
We've definitely gone to lots and lots of different interesting places, I'll say. Um, But I think, well, I'll tell you something. I mean, I don't know if this has never been said before, but um, what I'm getting, so this must be what the quantum drops once said, um, is that what actually instigated me to start that process, which was many many years ago. I was tending my plants, my master plants, and I heard, why do people think they need to ingest us in order to experience our medicine? Show them another way.
Mm,
So I was like, okay, like I mean, I knew about things like homeopathy, I knew about things like flower essences, but I knew that this was something different. And I was like, guys, I'm a neurologist. I mean, I'm a cool neurologist, but I'm not, this is like not my thing. And that has been actually a big part of the unfolding. So um, I think the drops and the plants, wanted to be said that this was not my project or my idea. This has been my service, I would
mm,
say. Um, and the way that they are being transmitted into the world and being offered is in that spirit of service. So I'm not sure why they would want that to be said exactly, but I think just even in terms of collaborating, offering, partnering, studying, sharing, that's really what this is about. Not like a company and you know whatever comes along with that. Like it's about a service and an offering.
it's very powerful what you just shared. I hope people listening to this recognize that. And speaking as a plant, like if I was a plant, I would not want to be consumed. However, I would want others to benefit from what I have to share. So it's almost like, that saying goes, you can have your cake and eat it too. So with this case, you can keep the plant and you can benefit from the message that the plant and the lessons that the plant has to offer you. And, and I know most people know this. Some of these plants are transient. So, for example, the psilocybin, it blooms and then it's gone, right? Within a couple of days. Whereas the vines and the cacti, those are going to be a little bit more, uh, you know, things that you can grow. And of course, through the mycelium, you can keep growing the psilocybin as well. So this has been really enlightening. I'm so happy for your discovery and the fact that you're propagating this message out there into the world. More people definitely need to hear this and experience it. Where can people go to learn more about the drops, get their hands on some? And then me being in Canada, the question naturally is, can these be shipped across the border? I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I know a lot of Canadians will have that question. So maybe you can answer that for us too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first, just to answer that, we've shipped to countries all over the world, including Canada, Australia, the Philippines, all over Europe, etc. No problems at all. So that's the first answer. And as far as where to go, you can go to drmaya.com, drmaya.com, and find all of the things I'm working on, including quantum drops. And then you can also go to quantumdrops.com to just find out about the quantum drops. And as I said, um, you know, soon to come, a much more richly informational page. I think what's there now is sufficient for many people, but I want to share more of the kinds of things that we talked about today. So that will be there soon.
Amazing. Um, Thank you again for your time, your generosity, your contribution to the healing of humanity. It's been wonderful to see the evolution, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Hopefully in September, we'll get to see each other at Mindshare. And again, thank you so much for everything that you're doing.
Thank you for having me here.
My pleasure. So, guys, check it out, quantumdrops.com. check out Dr. Maya's work. She's phenomenal in everything that she does, very passionate. And I hope that those of you that are interested get a chance to try out the drops. We'd love to hear your stories. I know she would love to hear your stories of transformation and experience that you get and out of using the products. And as we mentioned earlier in the conversation, we all have wounds. And sometimes we don't know what our life would be like until we start addressing some of those wounds because they accumulate over time and it just feels like life, but it's really this baggage that we're carrying around. So, as she was sharing, one of the things, images that comes up for me is like imagine buying a brand new car off the lot. And then every time you drive on the highway, there's going to be little rock chips that chip the paint. There's going to be dings when you go to the mall if somebody dings your door. And over time, you just kind of get used to those things and you almost forget what the car was like when it was brand new until you go to the dealership and they give you a loaner car and you get a brand new one and you're like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like. And that's the experience that I think many of us can achieve after we go through these type of revelatory experiences. I think the drops are a wonderful avenue and pathway for us to get there. They're legal, they're readily available, you can travel with them, you can ship them anywhere. And the beauty is the plants get to stay alive and transmit their benefit to the individual that's consuming them. So very much in alignment with my spiritual philosophies as well. So check them out. Let us know your experience. And here's to your continued health, happiness, and wholeness.